I have three tshuvas that I'd like to discuss with you today, and they're all related to either Shabbos or Tefillah. In fact, the first of the three is related to both Shabbos and Tefillah, and it comes up very often. And the issue is when a person, Rahman al is in Avelus, and Shabbos, of course, coincides with one of the Sayin Yemei Avelus. At what point on Erev Shabbos does he terminate his Avelus? That means he's allowed to prepare for Shabbos, he's allowed to go to shul, he doesn't have to stay in his house. And the flip side of this question is, how does the tzibur in the Beis HaKnesses receive the Ovel, which has many different dimensions to it? It's a question that touches on at what point can we invite the Ovel to be with us in the Beis HaKnesses. Perhaps at some point we should leave him out of the Beis HaKnesses. He's still an Ovel. And why is it within the framework of Avelus that we don't want the Ovel hanging around in shul unless it's absolutely necessary? One of the reasons it might be necessary is because of Nichum Avel. At what point are we menachem the Ovel? There are different minhagim here amongst the Ashkenazim, amongst the Sfardim. But one fundamental question that comes up is why? Why are we keeping the Ovel confined? Why are we being so inhibited about inviting the Ovel to be with us in the Beis HaKnesses? Could be that under certain situations during the Shivas Yimei Avelus, there are no opportunities to set up a minyan in the Beis Ovel. And in that case, maybe the Ovel, in order to say Kaddish, etc., will be allowed to go to shul under those extreme circumstances. But why are we racking our brains trying to figure out, is he allowed to leave his house? Is he not allowed to leave his house? The Rambam in Hilchos Avelus codifies 11 different Isurei Ovel. None of them include stepping out of the threshold of your house. So what's that all about? So again, at what point can the Avelus terminate for the sake of Shabbos? At what point do we does the Tzibur invite the Ovel to join us in the synagogue, and we will be menachem the Ovel? Now, apparently, somewhere in Australia, they had a bit of a strange minhag as far as this issue of inviting the Ovel to join in shul on Friday night. And the leaders of that community were concerned about this minhag. They weren't sure whether or not this minhag was reliable, was eisgehalten. And what they did was, they had the Avelim come into shul before Kabbalah Shabbos, and during Kabbalah Shabbos, the Avelim would sit somewhere in a separate section that was roped off in the back of the shul. And then when they got to Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, after reciting Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, then they invited the Avelim to join them and sit in the regular pews together with the rest of the tzibur. And because the leaders of the community had questions about this minhag, it was not something that they had seen in their childhood. They were familiar with the minhag of the Avelim joining before Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, not after Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos. And therefore they wanted to know, and they asked to research this innocently, is this a reliable minhag? And the answer that they were given was that in halacha, we always have to be sensitive to the distinction between minhag and din. When it comes to the issue of at what point we invite the Avelim to join us in the shul, to sit with us properly, and we're menachem the Avelim, at what point on Erev Shabbos, Leil Shabbos, do we do this? There are no strict laws about it. It's all a matter of minhag. And if the minhag evolved in a certain community, then we can be flexible about that minhag. But I have to comment, and we'll see if I can convince you of this, that even a minhag is not just what you call carte blanche. Just open the doors and let's be very embracing. Let's accept any minhag whatsoever. The evolution of a minhag has to be based on halacha. And that halacha in this particular context is that according to the Ashkenazic tradition, this is not true for Sfaradim, Nichum Avelim, insofar as it is a kiyum of Avelus, I'll try to explain what I mean by that, is antithetical to Shabbos, which means that we don't have Shabbos Avelus B'Farhesi. We only have Avelus B'Tzina during Shabbos. Once we invite the oven into the shul and we are menachem the oven as a tzibur, at that point we are touching on a very sensitive red line that we cannot cross, and that is Avelus B'Tzibur on Shabbos. Avelus B'Tzibur on Shabbos, from an Ashkenazic point of view, is antithetical to Shabbos itself. Shabbos is not a day for Avelus. If I could just request that you mute your microphone, because it's very disturbing. Again, I tried to do it, but it didn't happen. What's going on here is that the Sfaradim have Nichum Avelim on Shabbos. If you ask me why, I would give you the following answer. From the perspective of the Rambam, Nichum Avelim is what we call Kavod HaMes. The kiyum, primarily, again, there are other aspects and dimensions of Nichum Avelim. Obviously, we want to encourage the Avel, and the Avel will be consoled. That's already what we call Ben Adam Lechavero. That comes on the Chesed of V'ahavta L'recha Kamocha. But primarily, the main aspect of Nichum Avelim is Kavod HaMes. And as Sfaradim will put up a big sign on Shabbos, I mean, they'll put it up Erev Shabbos, obviously, with the name of the Niftar, maybe even a few words about the Niftar, so that the Menachamim are fulfilling Kavod HaMes. And Kavod HaMes is not antithetical to Shabbos. In fact, many of the halachas about Kavod HaMes will override the Shabbos. David HaMelech died on Shabbos, and they were able to move his body, the corpse, on Shabbos because of Kavod HaMes, and they did what's called Tino or Kikar, whatever it is. This is all because of Kavod HaMes. The secondary hue of Nichum Avelim from the Rama's perspective is Kavod HaChaim, which means Bein Adam L'Chaver V'Ahavta. That kiyum of Avelus is antithetical to Shabbos. For the Avel to experience Avelus on Shabbos publicly is antithetical to the Shabbos, but if it's not part of the kiyum of the Avel, if we're not implementing Nichum Avelim as an exhibition of Avelus, as part of the Avel's grief and mourning, if it's taken out of that context, it becomes Kavod HaMes, and it's not antithetical to Shabbos. In fact, the Rambam paskins that there's Nichum Avelim even for a person who dies without leaving any Avelim. There's not one Avel on the face of the earth. I mean, Mashal Amad Domer, a ger dies and he has no relatives. Just to give one example. The Rambam says we set up a base Avel for the purpose of Nichum Avelim. And the Rambam says if you have a choice between Nicham Avelim and Bikur Cholim, you will choose Nicham Avelim because it's covered a mess. So that's as far as the Sephardic tradition. But in the Ashkenazic tradition, the primary element of Nicham Avelim is Nihuge Avelus. In fact, if the Avel refuses to accept Menachamim, according to the Rambam Shita, it's irrelevant because Nicham Avelim is covered a mess, and the Avelim do not have they're not balabatim, they don't have dominion over covered a mess. They can't say, we don't want any Menachem. I'm very surprised. I don't know what goes on in your neck of the woods, but here, there's a brand new minhag. At least as far as I can tell, it's new. I don't remember this from my childhood. They write, these are the hours for Nicham Avelim, from 9 to 10 a.m. and from 9 to 10 p.m. Very nice. The Avelim are having a good time. They're eating together as a family. It's a healthy thing. I don't mind. But what about covered up mess? Who could show up from 9 to 10 in the morning when the first minyan in shul starts at 9 o'clock? Anyway, but from the perspective of Ashkenazi Jewry, if the Avelim are not in the mood for Nichum, for whatever reason, then the Ikar mitzvah is gone. Nichum Avelim is part of Avelus. And if they don't want the Nichum, then I would not say that that's a kiyum of a haftal l'reich kavuch. So we have to wait until the very last minute for Nichum Avelim on Shabbos. When I say we, I mean Ashkenazic Jews. And that should be the last moment before the tzibur accepts upon itself Shabbos with Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos. And that's why the question arises with regard to this minhag in Victoria, Australia. Now, I've never been to Australia, so I don't, show me a map of Australia, and the only places I can recognize are the places that showed up on this book that I have about the International Date Line. But they want to be Makabel, the Avelim, after Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos. Bit strange. I'm tempted to think that the evolution of this minhag was because of Sfaradim. I have no proof that there were Sfaradim who settled in that part of the world, but it would calm me down if somebody would do that research and conclude that there were, I don't know if at the time of the Inquisition, I don't know if any Sephardic Jews made it as far as Australia, but he says the following. Haminhag hamakubel eitz Ashkenazim hu she'avelim nichnosim lifnei Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos umekablim tanchumin mei hakol, because Kabbalas tanchumin, according to the Ashkenazim, is a kiyum and avelus, and we want the kiyum and avelus to be before the tzibur has Shabbos. However, he says, you know what? This is a matter of minhag, and therefore, every community can develop its own minhagim. And at the end of paragraph number Aleph, if you happen to have the text, he writes, "Nitam l'kayem es haminhag b'derech hanahuga b'kilas." We're not going to protest against your minhag. Every kehillah is entitled to develop its own minhagim, and therefore it's accepted. Now, in Sif Beis, if I can call your attention, he adds a very interesting point. At what point should the Avelim be Makabel Shabbos? They want to extend their Avelus because the halacha requires them to extend their Avelus. And therefore, their Kabbalah's Tanchume Avelus should be the latest time on Friday Chol. So we should extend Chol in this case. To extend the Kiyum Avelus in this particular circumstance, we can talk about Kabbalah's Tanchume Avel. We can talk about many other things. At what point does the Avel want to take a shower? At what point does he want to change his clothes? At what point does he want to sit in a company with the members of the shul? And one could argue that in all these cases, he should extend his Avelus as late as possible, which means that he should not be Makabel Shabbos early. It's very nice to be Makabel Shabbos early in many situations. Many Rishonim hold that Kabbalah Shabbos early is D'Oraisa. We all want to Kiyum D'Oraisa, do we not? But not in the case of Avelus. And therefore, the Avelim, if they were Makabel Shabbos back in their homes early, before they get to the Beis HaKnesses, then, you know what? Once they were Makabel Shabbos, he says, Ein baya b'nochachut ha'avelim bebeis HaKnesses. They were Makabel Shabbos, and therefore, their Avelus terminates. And so we can invite them to sit with the shul, even after the community will be Makabel Shabbos, because the Avel was Makabel Shabbos. Once he was Makabel Shabbos, he no longer has this restriction, this limitation of not socializing. And here, my friends, I am absolutely thrilled to share with you an Aruch HaShulchan, which I always believed was true, but I never knew that the Aruch HaShulchan says it. And this you'll see on page 30, which is the second page for today. And I'll show you where it is, if I can find it here. You may see it in footnote number 6, which is the first major footnote on page 30. If you take a look about halfway through a paragraph that starts with the word Hameiri, B'Aruch HaShulchan Yoredei Simon Shin Tzadi Gimel Kosav, Habaya B'Shehut Ha'Avel Beis HaKnesses. Why are we nervous about the Avelim sitting with us together in the shul, and we're setting them up out there? Some people have the minhag, they're not even in the vestibule of the shul, the sanctuary, they're outside the sanctuary. Why? He says, because we don't want himatzus bechabura v'nil sichos v'atzibur. Do you hear this, Rabbosai? This changes our whole attitude towards Nichum Avelim. When you go in to be Menachem and Avel, what do you talk to it? What do you speak with the Avel? What do you talk to him about, or her? Talk about how, what was it called in Toronto? The Blue Jays? What's the name of the team? The Blue Jays? Is it such? If I remember from 10 years ago, talk about the latest scores. Talk about the stock market. Tell jokes. Is that what Nichum Avelim is about? That, my friends, in the Aruch HaShulchan's perspective, is the exact opposite, is antithetical to Nichum Avelim, because the Kiyum of Avelus is anything but socializing. Hahimatzut b'chevra and niul sichotim atzibur, that's antithetical to Avelus. Dava nafshi, the Avel is isolated. Rahman al-Islam. He's in a state of total lowliness. That's what Avelus is all about. During Avelus, he has only one good friend up in Shamayim. And the whole concept of Avelus is to restore that relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. It's not about socializing. It's not about telling jokes. And the Aruch HaShulchan says we begin to appreciate why the Avelim on Leil Shabbos should not be sitting together with the rest of the tzibur. Did you ever think about that? It's cruel, is it not? Even in Victoria, what do? They set up a bounded section for the Avelim. The Rosh in Masechet Ksubos quotes a minhag in his time that the Avelim had to wear a special hat that's called ituf, and they used to put the Avelim in a separate section in the shul. And people would file by that section to be menachem the Avelim. So why are the Avelim in a separate section? Why do you rope them off? What are they, lepers? Yes, in a sense they are lepers. They are being quarantined. Not the quarantine of Corona. That was 2 weeks ago we spoke about Corona, but we're no longer talking about Corona. We're talking about the loneliness of an oven, which is not just, as my Rebbe of Salvation would call it, existential loneliness. It's halachic loneliness. And take a look at footnote number 7 to see the next paragraph in the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan says that at what point should the Avelim stand up on Erev Shabbos from their Avelis? Shava Reba Kodem Knisas HaShabbos. Also, we're not talking about 12 noon. We're not talking about 1 p.m. We're talking about an hour and a quarter before Shkia. We're talking about Plaga Mincha. We're talking about a period of time that halachically it's Shabbos. I mean, it's not Shabbos unless you're Makabel Shabbos. But it's a time period when you can be Makabel Shabbos. It's royal Makabel Shabbos. Says Ubizman Zeh, at that point, an hour and a quarter before Shabbos, Misorim Umisnarim Havelim Likras HaShabbos. Now's the time. Is Ori for the Shabbos. And there's no Avelus if it contradicts Shabbos. He says, Efsha Kvar Lilbosh Min Olim, put on his shoes. And that's when the time is to terminate one's Avelus. You take a look above the footnotes in the text itself on page 30, in paragraph number Gimel, he writes, L'chatchila nogu shavim nichnosu beis hakneses kodem bismar shir yom HaShabbos. Be'ez hatzorech, hem yicholim likanes lebeis hakneses k'shava reba after Plaga Mincha kodem hashkia. What he's doing now is he's plugging in the Aruch HaShulchan into the issue of inviting the Avelim into the Beis HaKnesses. We can invite them in Plaga Mincha time. Why? Because that's the time when the Avel makes the transition into Shabbos. That's when he gets up from his Avelus in order to be Misorer for Shabbos. That's when we should invite him in. Why does he say Be'ez HaTzorah? And the answer is because although it may take him at least an hour to prepare for Shabbos, to shine his shoes, to change his clothes, to clean his body for Shabbos, whatever it is. But why does he have to come to shul an hour and a quarter before Shabbos? That's not necessary. But Be'ez HaTzorah, if there's some pressing need Maybe because the tzibur wants to be makabel early Shabbos and he's afraid he won't get another minyan at the time of Shabbos. Maybe because Barov Hamajus Melech, there's a very large congregation gathered together, and he wants to expand that element of Kvod HaMes in Nicham Avel. There may be any number of reasons why the Avel wants to come early into the shul, and Yecholim Likanes LeBeis HaKnesses, we're going to allow them in. And now he has an even more extreme case where they have to let him into the Beis HaKnesses. I don't know why. Maybe you could help me with that. Shatayim v'chetzi lifnei Ashkia, which is what we call Mincha Tana. Now, that's too early for Kabbalah Shabbos, but Mincha Tana is already Bein Arbayim, so to speak. It's already part Erev. And that gives it the status of Erev Shabbos. So again, if there's some pressing need, we can invite the Ovel into the Beis HaKnesses even as early as Mincha Ketana, 2.5 hours before Shabbos. But B'chol HaMikrim, Rosh Avelim Yeshvu B'tzad Beis HaKnesses. One thing is clear, according to all the kulos that we come up with, it is absolutely imperative that the Avelim on Leil Shabbos, up until the moment of Kabbalah Shabbos, should be sitting separately, because the need for socialization is antithetical to Shabbos. So to put the Avelim together with the Tzibur, if it's a matter of Avelis B'far Hesya, that means that by isolating the Avelim, we are desecrating, if you will, the Kedusha Shabbos, the Kvod Shabbos, by injecting Avelis into our observance of Shabbos. That's a different story. But that's only after the Tzibur was Makabel Shabbos. I submit to you that this is an eye-opener for me in many different ways. The flexibility to allow an Ashkenazic community based on their so-called minhag to be Makabel Shabbos and then be Menachem Avelim. That's one dimension of this tshuva that I find very surprising. Secondly, something that I always felt intuitively, that we should delay the Avelim as long as possible, because the Avelis continues until it clashes with Shabbos. This is an eye-opener for me. But the biggest eye-opener, which I felt intuitively all these years, but I never saw the Aruch HaShulchan. I should have looked at the Aruch HaShulchan. I'm a big fan of the Aruch HaShulchan, only because I love to disagree with him. Oh, not because I don't respect him. He's right and I'm wrong, but I still love to disagree with him because he always says something original. But the Aruch HaShulchan, it is an analytic mind, gives me an insight into what Avelis is all about and why our mode of Nicham Avelim is off kilter to a large extent. I remember I had a Rebbe, I was very close to him. He died a relatively young man, Rav Nisan Alpert. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He lost his son Yeshaya. I think he was 21. I can't remember exactly how old he was. And when he sat Shiva for his son, there was an unwritten rule, but everybody knew it. If you're coming to be Menachem Avel, you're speaking about his son. If you're not speaking about his son, don't bother coming. I mean, you can do the formal in and out, Mokum Menachem. And especially in the light of the Rambam, that Nicham Avelim is L'Kvod HaMes primarily. And the Sfaradim have Nicham Avelim even on Shabbos L'Kvod HaMes. Is it appropriate to discuss the scores of the here in my neck of the woods of the soccer game, or maybe in your neck of the woods, the hockey game. I don't know. All I remember about hockey was two things: Bobby Hull, and if I went to Madison Square Garden and there was no fight on the field, then I wanted my money. That's all I remember about hockey. Anyway, let's move on to page 31. And now we're in South Africa, in the city of Cape Town. A Jew, an Orthodox Jew, owns a college, and he wants to know if he can keep the doors of the college open on Shabbos. The students will come in, the professors will teach, and the college is functioning on Shabbos. Fascinating question. It touches a little bit on what you may remember we discussed last week with regard to a person who owns a vending machine and he keeps it open on Shabbos, or he gives a horat keva to a bank to allow them to make transactions and pay his bills on Shabbos. This is a question of finances on Shabbos, but it's more than just finances, my friend. We're talking about running a college on Shabbos, students coming in and out, studying in classes, sitting out on the lawn with their professors. Again, I'm just imagining. All this is going on in Shabbos. And who owns the college? Reb Yid. He's the Gabbai of the Beis HaKnesset. Maybe worse, maybe he's the president. Oh, sorry, Bobby. Anyway, is it allowed? Now, the reason I'm fascinated by this tshuva is because one of the most important aspects of this tshuva is a concept that's not very well understood, and that's Maris Ha'ayin. So that when we go through this tshuva, we should keep the following introduction in mind. If keeping the college open entails Maris Ha'ayin, I'll give you an extreme case. Let's say everyone in the entire Cape Town community knows that this Yid has invited his college professors as part of the contractual agreement to lecture on Shabbos, on Saturday. Our university operates on Saturday. We don't operate on Sunday, heaven forbid, but we're open on Saturday. And we will pay our professors to come in on Saturday. That is completely awesome. And even if it's not true, but if people think it's true, that makes it Maris Ayin. So we have to be absolutely careful that there's no Maris Ayin issue here. That no one should dream that these professors are getting a separate salary for lecturing on Shabbos, on Saturday. And that's an important introduction as we go through this tree. Let's assume we've cleared the air of Maris Ayin. Is it mutter? First, we have to know when the Jewish students who might show up in college on Saturday. After all, you're opening the doors of the college on Saturday. You'll be tempting many Jews to come. Now, there's no official fee. You follow my point? It's like Eschatoyani Mazkir. I'm a big art fan. So in Budapest, the National Gallery doesn't charge anyone entrance on Saturday for whatever reason, not because of me. The only problem is that in order to get into the museum, there are electric doors. So there's a solution to that problem. In any event, are Jewish students coming to the university on Shabbos? There may be a host of issues here of Lifnei Iver, of Messiah Leover Avera. If the Jews are coming in on Shabbos, they're going to be tempted to take notes, etc., etc., etc. We have to solve that problem. Oh, Bobby, I'm sorry.
What's the?
As soon as I mentioned Budapest, He wakes up. Yeah, good.
What's the Issur Shabbos here in the first place with the college?
Oh.
I mean, you're giving lectures, you're like, what, yes, people might take notes, but that's their choice.
Are you paying them to come in on Saturday? Meaning,
so it's Schar Shabbos.
Schar Shabbos.
Okay,
Besides Marasayan, besides Lifnei Iver, Jewish people coming in on the college, it might be the Tila Schar Shabbos. What's happening is you are making a transaction in which you pay salaries for people to work on your behalf for Shabbos. You're not allowed to hire Polim for work on Shabbos. Now, if the Polim are coming in on their own initiative, they can come in any day of the week. They decided for whatever reason they want to show up in college on Saturday because your doors are open. That's not a problem if we solve Maris Ein.
However you get around the problem of any like even a yeshiva or a shul of paying people on Shabbos, whether it's Havlah, however you deal with that problem, you should be able to deal with that here also.
Right, but it seems that there was a special contractual salary relationship organized for Saturday, which was quite common. Again, under those circumstances, it's absolutely forbidden. It says the following. This is based on a tshuva of the Chassam Sofer. L'chatchila roi shebichlala b'balut Yehudit lo tekayem limudim b'Shabbatot. The Chassam Sofer, back to Hungary again, in Pressburg, he couldn't understand it. All the universities are closed on Saturday. And this Yid opens up his college on Saturday? What does that look like? So in his context, historically, this is something you want to avoid. It smacks on Chil Shabbos. Like, what is with your Shabbos? You're a Fruma Yid. You're an Orthodox Jew. The universities are closed on Saturdays, and you open yours on Saturday. So therefore, lechatchila, we should avoid it. Does that apply in our contemporary context? Basically, nicht. I would assume, again, I'm not from Cape Town, that there are probably other colleges that are open on Saturday in college. Maybe there are no lectures going on. Maybe there are only libraries that are open. Maybe the dining facilities are functioning up and running on Saturday. I don't know. Now that's all lechatchila. So please underline the word lechatchila, because the word lechatchila in this particular context, not always, means that the ideal situation, meta halachically, besides alpi, it's not alpi din, is that we should avoid such a situation. That this Jew opens up his college with lectures, students, and professors on Saturday. That should be avoided. But not al pi halacha. Al pi halacha in paragraph base, mutar liyehudi, a Jew is allowed to tell a guy to do malach on his behalf if he doesn't instruct the guy specifically to do the malach on Saturday. The guy makes his decision on his own that he's going to choose to do the malach on Saturday. It's not contractually binding or obligatory for him to come in on Saturday. Hayehudi lo horalo lasota dafka b'Shabbos. Ela hagoy midaito bochar lasos b'Shabbos. This is a sugya in Masechta Shabbos, and you'll see it in footnote number 2, codified by the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos Perek Vav. Adaite de nafshe ka'ov. It's not you that are instructing the guy to do the work for you on Shabbos. It's the guy's own decision. Adaite denafshei ka'av. However, now we get to what I think, for my own purposes, not objectively, is why I want to learn this tshuva with you. And that is Maris Ayin. Because I think there are so many mistakes out there about what Maris Ayin is and what it isn't. And you'll hear it left, right, and center. Maris Ayin, he says, even if the guy makes his own decision on his own initiative to work on Shabbos for you, and it's mutter, Dafka, he says, in ein chashash shel Maris Ayin. This is not an easy matter. How does the world, meaning the spectators, how do they know that the guy chose on his own to do the malach on Shabbos? That's a very challenging agenda or goal to achieve. Could you imagine, Rabbi Osai? You're building a house, correct? What that means in your neck of the woods, I think, and now it began to go on here in Israel, is that you buy a house, or you own a house, and you wreck the whole house and rebuild it. Baruch Hashem. I have to quote the Breslovers. The Breslovers say that Ashirus is something spiritual. So if you're wealthy, it's a spiritual thing. So you have non-Jewish workers, construction workers, who are building your house on Shabbos. Do the spectators know that this was a decision that was totally voluntary on the part of the workers to choose to do the work on Saturday? In many cases, you're in a great rush to get the house up and finished. We're not going to give the workers off on Saturday. We'll give them off on Sunday. You're paying them for Saturday. So in the college situation, how do you send out the word that it was the decision on the part of the professors, those who showed up on Saturday, to teach? It was Adaite denafshei ka'av. He says, this is a lot of what we're going to see here is based on the Ramah, based on the Mishnah Berurah. Maris Ayin applies in the following circumstances. We're going to carve it out and restrict it. Number one, he says, who knows, is it public knowledge that this college is privately owned? And even if it is not public knowledge, who knows that the owner of this college is a Jew? The Mishnah Berurah writes that afilu im ktsas yodin, there are a few Levinim out there who know, they're privy to the information that Sam Levine owns this college. He says that's not Maris Ayin. Number two, where do the professors teach their courses and give their lectures on Saturday? Where is it taking place? He says, if it's out in the public eye, that's called Maris Ha'ayin. But in the binyan sagur, there's a wing of the college, let's call it offices, that's outside of the public eye. Even if there are staff members who are Jewish and they know that the professors are holding classes in those rooms, Nevertheless, he says that it's considered mutter. Why? You have Jews that know that these college classes are being offered in rooms out of the public eye. And the answer is the Ramah in Orach Chaim Reish Mem Gimel L'Gabi Merchatz. The Ramah says that bathing in a merchatz is prohibited on Shabbos unless you bathe in one of the inner rooms, which are locked up and they're out of the public eye. Again, we have to go in. There are a lot of details here in Siman Reish Mem Gimel. Please I don't want you to walk out of here with a carte blanche impression that you're allowed to bathe on Shabbos. But basically, what the Ramah is establishing is a halachic legal distinction that does not necessarily reflect reality. It's a halachic distinction that we're cutting the chase on a definition of Maras Ayin. And we are saying that forget about who knows what. There are Yodei Davar that know that there's a merchatz in the back of his house. And he's inviting Goyim to use his merchatz. There are Jews who know about that. But the question is, where is the location? And if it's a location that is accessible to the public eye, that's Maras Ayin. If it's locked up in an inner room, it's not Maras Ayin. And Rabbosai, this Ramah is very, very difficult because over and over and over again, in almost every single sugya, it's like I always say, whenever the Gemara asks the question of Gzeira Hivanan Nekum V'Nigzar Gzeira, you always know the Gemara's answer is in Kula Chad Gzeira. You can write the text. Whenever you learn a Gemara about Maras Ayin, you could write the text. It's always going to say, wherever it is in Shas, that Maras Ayin is also afilu b'chadrei chadorim. But it's very complicated because there are sugyas in Beitza and in Shabbos that seem to indicate that chadrei chadorim is mutar, but again, it's very specific circumstances. Number 3, or whatever number we're up to. He says, Asiyas Malacha is not necessary. You can teach a class and deliver a lecture without using the whiteboard or whatever they call it. Therefore, although it could very well be that malachos will be done, that's not Maras Ayin. Maras Ayin applies when the spectator realizes that the malacha is being implemented. And in this case, on behalf of the Jew who owns the college and is paying salaries and people are paying tuition and he's making money for Sar Shabbos, there's no Maras Ayin because it's not necessary to have malacha to be done. So I have to tell you something, Rabbosai, and I'm going to ask you to shlug me up because I'm very, very hurt about this. It bothers me to no end. The museum is open on Shabbos. Again, I'm not a kano. You know my personality. I'm not out there throwing sticks at the police or anything like that against the Zionist, state or anything like that. But listen to this and erase it. I'm going to have to erase it from the tape, but I don't have time to shut the tape. The National Museum of the State of Israel has to be open on Shabbos? So you'll tell me what? Oh, they're not doing any malacha. They're not doing any malacha. You can run a museum, a major museum. It takes up a quarter of the city of Jerusalem. And you're going to tell me there's no Chil Shabbos? What am I naive? I don't get it. You know, if the Hungarians want to keep the National Gallery of Budapest open on Saturday, and I know that there's some Chil Shabbos going on, what do I care? Let the Hungarians be Michal Shabbos from now until Mashiach time. But the National Museum of the country of Israel? Give it a break. They have an exhibit now going on called Jewish Painters. You know, famous painters that were Jewish. I hate to say it. They're not very Jewish. The only one is Joseph Israels. We have recorded historical information that Joseph Israels, 120 years ago, whenever it was, gave a pshetel at his bar mitzvah. I'm not sure if we have the pshetel, but I'm a big fan of Joseph Israels, as you know. I love his paintings. But I only found one Jewish painting. And it's not here in the Israel Museum. He has a chuppah scene. Beautiful, typical Joseph Israel. But you have an exhibit about fishermen in the Netherlands, and you got Joseph Israels right up there. Beautiful paintings at the seashore. I won't mention some of the names of the painters they have here. They were about as Jewish as Theodor Herzl. I shouldn't say that. Theodor Herzl might have had some Yiddishkeit. I don't know. But not these guys. These are German impressionist, what they call expressionist art. I only know about this because I only know that so-and-so is being exhibited because my oldest sister volunteers for the Israel Museum. But hey, look, if you want to see a good collection of old Chanukiot, you can find it in the Israel Museum. You may even find, if you're lucky on exhibits, some ancient manuscripts of Machzorim from 900 years ago. And I remember once they had an exhibit of old ksubas. What a mitzvah gedola would be to create a real Jewish museum. The closest thing to a Jewish museum here in this state of Israel is either Diaspora Museum, which has a shmek of Yiddishkeit. And since Rabbi Lau joined the Hanhala of Yad Vashem, they've added a shmek of Yiddishkeit to Yad Vashem. You have to have a good sense of smell to smell it out, but there is a shmek of Yiddishkeit. And there's a museum here for Gush Katif, which, by the way, is again, it's not a world-class museum, but if you have a chance on your next trip, it's kedai to see what the people built up there in Gush Katif. I had a friend who was murdered there by the Machshimon, by the terrorists. Number 4, let me just see how we're doing. We got to move fast, but this Marasayan is fascinating to me. He says the following. He says there's a halacha of a sodeh where derech lekabel sodos biarisus, which means the following. Again, I think the English translation is a sharecrop. I don't like when halachic concepts are translated to English. It loses a lot in translation. But anyway, what it means is that the goy becomes a partner with the Jewish Baal Hasoda in the produce. That's called a kinyan karka leperos. So that the guy as an oris has a kinyan in the karka. When he works the karka on Shabbos, there's no marasayan. Why is there no marasayan? The man is plowing your field on Shabbos. But the answer is, because since it's Barisus, therefore, whatever work he's doing on behalf of himself. He gets a third or whatever of the profits. So the Mishnah Berurah writes that if you're located in a place where it's quite common to give out your field for arisus, then it's mutter. And once again, we're finding a case where there's no maris ayin because of halachic structure, whether it's a guy is adaiting the nafshikov, he has vested interest, he's a part owner, and he gets the produce, he's working your field on Shabbos. He says, af b'ofen zeh, he says, even if we can circumvent the Isser of Netilas Shabbos, Skar Shabbos, there's no separate contract for Shabbos, it's Adaiti Nafsh. Even if we circumvent all the prohibitions of Marasayin. Yesh levadei shamartzim v'student v'yudim yed'u she'eda muchrochem lavod or lilmod b'Shabbos. You must notify any Jewish students in the college that they don't have to come in on Shabbos. And that's going to cover you for the issue of Lifnei Iver. Now, let's not be naive. There may be Jewish students who will show up on Shabbos. But Haliteni l'Rosh Hashanah, in other words, I notified them that there's no need for them to come on Shabbos. And finally, you know, it's one thing to say that the lecturers are in the inner chambers in different offices and so forth, giving the lectures. It's not necessary for them to do malacha, etc. Nobody forced them to come in on Shabbos. That's wonderful. But what about student activities? He calls it Pilut b'Shabbat. And all these kinds of activities entail violation of the Shabbos. He says, Yesh la'afsher l'studentim Yehudim chalufos acheros kedei shadavar lo yigrom lachsholas Yehudim chas v'sholom b'chil Shabbos. He stipulates the condition that you have to guarantee the Jewish students that if they don't participate in those activities on Shabbos, we will offer them other activities during the week to more than make up for it and to balance that they shouldn't be tempted to join those activities on Shabbos. I want to mention a story from my youth. My father, as you know, was a Rav in Flatbush in Brooklyn. The local college was Brooklyn College, a massive college, part of CUNY. And one shiloh that he used to get over and over again was about Yom Tovim, especially Sukkot and Pesach. Jewish students would call up my father and ask him, what could we do? They are giving examinations on Yom Tov. Not on Chol HaMoed, but on Yom Tov. Chol HaMoed, as we say, we can find a heter perhaps, but not on Yom Tov. So I'll never forget this. My father used to always tell me the following, There were Jewish professors in Brooklyn College, and of course, Gentile professors. He said, I shouldn't say this publicly, why am I sharing this? But he said that whenever he had to contact a Gentile professor, he would make overboard an exam for a Jewish student that he shouldn't have to be Machal Yontif. But if it was a Jewish professor, the answer always was, who declared Sukkot as a national holiday? My father used to call them Kosim Ubarkonim. These are the weeds that poison the fields of Jewish minds in America and have to be weeded out. When it came to this kind of thing, my father had no compassion. That one person, he was Lubavitcher, my father, 7 generations Lubavitch. Makarev, it was all about Kiruv. My father's whole life, beginning to end, started with a kuf and ended with a base. It was all about Kiruv. But when it came to these professors, then we should weed them out of the Jewish nation. They are worse than the Malshinim Malsi Sikva that we prayed. He couldn't tolerate. Since when did Sukkot become a national holiday? Now, Rabbosai, if you have an extra 5 minutes, I would like to introduce a very sticky topic about women and prayer, which you'll see here on page 25. You can't stay, Bobby?
Can I ask a question? No, I have a question. What about the concept of selling the business for Shabbos itself?
Excellent. I see you have a Hasidic mind. What do I mean? I have a student, Yossi Sawson, who married into a family in Cleveland. Now, if you know anything about the Midwest, every Shana Yid in the Midwest, I'm exaggerating, is in what business, what field? The old age business, right?
Nursing homes.
Nursing homes. So he married into a family, Baruch Hashem, they have nursing homes all over the place. Anyway, they were considering buying a certain nursing home, or at least partnership in a nursing home, that serves Basa B'Cholov, which is also by noise, I don't have to tell you. McDonald's cheeseburgers. I said to him, Yossi, that question you have to ask a Hasidic Rebbe, because the Hasidim are experts. This is a tradition that dates back centuries in working out a contract in such a way that that part of the income of the company is not yours. But just to end, as a very short introduction to the issue of women in davening, what is a woman's obligation? And here too, I believe there's a lot of misnomers, a lot of mistakes. Many people will tell you, based on the Rambam, that let her say one prayer a day, maybe Moda'ani, and it's all okay. Not so posh. The Rambam, in 2 places, tells us that Noshim Chayovos B'Tfilah. In Perek Aleph, the Rambam says, Noshim Chayavan B'Tfilah B'Fnei Mitzvah Asay Shelo Azman Groma. And the Rambam, as you know, opens up Hilchos Tfilah and establishes that Tfilah is a doraisa. And the Rabbanan did not step in yet. We're now on a doraisa level, pre-Takanas Chachamim. There's no separate time designated for Tfilah. It's 24/7. It's a classic mitzvah saseh shelo azman grom. Therefore, the Rambam says that women are obligated. Now, fast forward to the end of Perek Vav. Nashim uktanim chayot b'tfilah. And everyone and his uncle asked the following question: why does the Rambam repeat himself? This is not the Rambam. The Rambam opens up the Tfilah, Perek Aleph Halacha Beis, tells you women are obligated in Tfilah. It's not a mitzvah seishas man grama. Why does he repeat himself? at the end of Perek Vav. So you open up, this is my style, to the Sefer Mafteach on this Rambam, and he writes, V'afal gav shekvar kosav harambam li'el v'perek aleph, hainu min haTorah. V'ilukan, but here in Perek Vav, kamashmol on a Rambam, v'chayovin bizmanei atfila ubenusach shetiknu chachamim. And listen to the list of commentaries that came up with the same solution. Seder HaMishnah, Piduche ben Aryeh, Bechir Chaim, Kapos Tmorim. I mean, it's like a who's list. In my mind, there's no question about it. Those who want to say that the Rambam would allow a woman to recite Moda Ani and Farting Amaisa are oblivious to this obvious reading in the Rambam. I would add a little bit of my own here. Noshim dumya dektanim. The Rambam in the same breath in Perek Vav, at the end of Perek Vav, writes Noshim dektanim. Now I ask you, are ktanim obligated in tefillah midoraisa? No way, no how. A katan is not obligated in any mitzvah doraisa. Elavos, the Ram wants to tell you that tefillah also has a dimension that's the Rabbanan. So tefillah fits under two different categories. It's the Oraisa, and it's the Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan established the Nusach HaTefillah, and it's Mani HaTefillah, and many, many different nuances of requirements. That's all the Rabbanan. On a Rabbanan level is obligated in tefillah. The Rambam repeats himself here because he wants to tell you that just like Tanim are obligated in tefillah midrabanan, Nashim are obligated in tefillah midrabanan. The Ramban says explicitly that women are obligated in tefillah midrabanan because the Ramban holds that there is no tefillah doraisa for women because there's no tefillah doraisa for men. The whole institution or obligation of tefillah is all the Rabbanan. So when the Gemara says in Brachas Daf Chaf, on the Mishnah that says that Noshim are chayiv in tefillah, so the Gemara says Pshita, Maiko Mashmul, and Mao the Tema says the Gemara on Daf Chaf Amid Beis, Kevan the chayiv Erev Vokim Mitzarayim Havile Mitzah Seichas Man Groma Kam Mashmulon. Says the Ramban, Kamashmalan, that tefillah d'Rabbanan, even though it's a mitzvah seishas man groma, d'Rabbanan obligated to women. Hence, when the Mishnah says Nashim are obligated to tefillah, brachas daf chav, what the Mishnah means to tell you is that they're obligated like men 3 times a day. Ma'ariv is another issue, really, because of we paskin that Arv is reshus. And everybody says, well, we're going to rely on the Rambam sheet. Because the Rambam holds that tefillah is doraisa, doesn't have zmanim, and the Kamash Malan is that women are obligated only in tefillah doraisa, which is any time during the course of the day, and any simple little tefillah. And even though the pasuk describes Erev Vokav Tzarayim, it remains a mitzvah seisha einas man grom, but they're only obligated to tefillah doraisa. I understand what moves them. I mean, nowhere does the Rambam say explicitly that women are obligated midrabanan in tefillah. Nowhere does the Rambam go out of his way to tell us that women are obligated to daven Erev Vokav Tzarayim. The absence of the Rambam seems to indicate that women are not on the same level as men. But hey, I have a simple answer to that question. The Rambam didn't feel compelled to spell out Zmani HaTefillah because he tells you that Noshim Uktanim Chayovim B'Tefillah. And included in that statement of the Rambam is Tefillah D'Rabbanan. Like this entire list of who's who in the Achronim, they all interpret the Rambam based on that commentary that the Rambam repeats Noshim to tell you that not only on Noshim Chayovas D'Oraisa, because the mitzvah seisha einas man groma, they're also Chayovas midrabban. So I ask you the following: if both, again, if you agree with me on the Ramban, you can't disagree with me. It's explicit in the Ramban. But if we assume that the Rambam and the Ramban are on one page, and women are obligated in Tefillah D'Oraisa and in Tefillah D'Rabbanan, are you going to be comfortable to tell women that they can say Moda Ani and Fartik Amaisa? I'm not comfortable. Okay, then, Emir Hashem, we'll pick it up. We'll pick it up next.
Thank you, Rav. Have a good day.
Sure.
Yeah.
Berzon.
Yes. Oh, you caught me just in time.
If one more minute, just to
2 more minutes.
share an anecdote, Lishvach. So we used to do a lot of work in the heyday of Olympia in York, the Reichman family's business, and they were so makpid that work should not go on their projects, that, you know, in other words, even if somebody wanted to come in on his own, he wanted to come in and do his work, not because anybody asked him to do it, they shut them down and locked them. And if you came to the job site on Shabbos, you literally could get kicked off of the whole project. And like they were mamish, and everybody knew, all the workers knew that you cannot come to their sites on Shabbos. That's how makpid they were, you know, on that aspect of Maris Ayin, and you know.
It's a great Kiddush Hashem. Why? Because there's so many issues here. If you read this tshuva, for example, you see that he's tiptoeing through the tulips. He's trying to see how we could allow this college to open on Shabbos. Yeah, it's Adaiti the Nafshe COVID. We didn't ask them to come in. It's not Maris Ayin because who knows and who doesn't know, and it's private, and it's also, you know what? Once you're looking for all these heterim, look, in many areas, Bobby, you and I know that the poskim have to find heter. You know, we spoke about it in Corona a dozen times. You're talking about things like pikuach nefesh and so forth, the nurse coming in and getting a lift and blah, and blah, and blah. But when you're coming to Shabbos and you're talking about a public institution, I don't know, it seems to me, again, you can't just say it's usher if it's not usher. And in Lumbus, in Talmud Torah, we have to go through the sugya, you know, with a very fine-tooth comb. But if you ask me, you know, they say about all the great poskim, I don't know, I heard the story about many different people, that even before they gave you an answer to that question, they knew what the answer was going to be. The logic came afterwards. There are certain things that intuitively, you know, to look here and there, we studied that tshuva of the Chamuri Daniel and the story, you know, between Rav Reisman Shlita and the Minchas Yitzchak. You know, you have a sniff here and a sniff here, and you churn it out together, and before you know it, it's mud. You know, in certain cases, maybe we have to do that. You know, I did a lot of research. I wrote 2 major articles in my life on yichud. Okay, in certain cases, we have to find a kula. You have an elderly gentleman, and he has to be serviced by, in this case, a nurse. If it's not a male nurse, you know, you have issues of yichud. You have cases where there's no one there to watch the little girl who's 3 years old. Do you understand what I mean? And it's a bit of a shas hadcha, even with regard to help in the family or women working in the market. Again, you know, it's problematic because we live in such a decayed society. But I'm just saying, leaving that out for a moment, you know, you turn back the clock, the tshuvas that I quote from Egypt 5 centuries ago. I mean, women who had jobs that literally carried the family. Again, is it good for Jewish society that women are working out there? I don't know, but you know, you could argue. I am not so sure. I'm a big fan of what's happening now. But in a certain context, you know, you start looking for a kula here, kula there. I remember I asked once Rav Scheinberg, Zichron Livracha, Shaila, So he told me to leave the door ajar. I said, does it have to be open? He said, no, just ajar. Why? Because it was, it was a private house, blah, blah, blah. There were all sorts of svaras. But at the end of the day, I ask you the question, who's going to come into my house, and except for a thief, just because I left the door a little ajar? So in certain contexts, we have to look for a sniff. The biggest pellet to me, I don't want to keep you, is that the Mekil Sheba Mekilim in Yichud, you'll never guess in a million years, was the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish has coolest that are wild. You've got a man, a husband, he's in a hospital bed. His leg, Nebuch, up on a cast, a full cast, hanging from the ceiling. His wife is alone. It's in the same city. Baila Be'iri's mat. Late at night, the door is unlocked. It's mut. So they ask the Chazon Ish, what do you mean it's mut? Just because the door is unlocked? He says, Yesh pera adam echad sheikanes believe this. There's one wild, guy, this pera adam, who's going to come in. Amazing. So I'm not telling you that, I advocate in favor of relying on the Chazon Ish in all cases of Yichud, but we're going to use it when we need to use it. But in the case of Shabbos, if the Reichmans felt this is not a Shas Hadcha, Hashem will bless them. Mizonosim Shaladam Ksubim. If they keep the place, the Gesheft closed on Shabbos, that's a great Kiddush Hashem.
Anyway, I just wanted to share that. I think, l'shvach, that was Mamash Kiddush Hashem.
I'm very excited. Did you guys ever hear of Henry Feuerstein, all the Shalom, from Boston? It was a famous story. I don't know if it was on the front page of the New York Times, but it got very good press. I'm shocked that the New York Times published this. But he had a major factory. He had mostly Hispanic workers. And there was a fire. The whole place went up in smoke. And he continued to pay salaries.
Right.
That's what I call a Kiddush Hashem. Al Pi Din, he was certainly part. All right, we should be Zocher Mitzvah Hashem, that we should be an Arla Goy. Called to